Nestled in a typically quiet neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota, lived a young married couple, the Firkuses. Nicholas and Heidi had originally met in church when he was a junior in high school and she was just a freshman. As they grew older, Nick began working as a contractor for his father's carpet cleaning business, and Heidi worked a few minimum wage jobs before securing a position at a financial service company. Nick and Heidi had mentors at their local church who described him as a warm, friendly personality and her as the type of person that everyone liked. The life of the party, yet still reliable and organized. The young couple wed in 2005, and by 2007, they were purchasing their first home. Everything was perfect, or at least seemed to be. April 25th, 2010 was anything but typical. Around 6:30 a.m. in the early morning, 25-year-old Heidi Firkus dialed 911 to report a break-in at her home.
Someone's trying to break into my home.
Then a gunshot and scream, and the phone goes dead.
A little over a minute later, Heidi's husband Nick called 911 from the same phone, explaining that they had both been shot by the intruder. Heidi had been shot in the back and was sadly already deceased by the time police and paramedics arrived on scene. Nick had escaped the same ill fate as his wife, sustaining only a graze wound on his thigh, which was treated at a nearby hospital. Police dove straight into investigation by questioning the neighbors, but almost no one saw anything out of the ordinary, except for a pet sitter next door. After the sitter had awoken to the sound of tiny meows from the kittens he was looking after, he heard a muffled argument coming from nearby. The sitter proceeded to stick his head out the window facing the Firkus home to eavesdrop when he heard gunshots and a man yell, "You shot her. You shot me. Please, please, no." However, he denies seeing anyone flee from the Firkus household following the commotion. After Nick received treatment for his gunshot wound, he headed down to the police station to give a statement about what had led up to the tragic event that fateful morning. Back at the police station, Nick began recalling the events of the previous night leading into the morning. The couple had ordered takeout and decided to watch the movie Avatar the evening of the 24th. Around 11 p.m., they headed upstairs and called it a night. The next morning, around 6 a.m., Nick got up to get a drink of water from their bathroom and then climbed back into bed, falling asleep for 10 to 15 minutes. Then he heard the screen door downstairs open and somebody rattling the front doorknob. This caused him to grab his shotgun from their closet and load it before waking Heidi, who was sleeping like a rock. He immediately told Heidi that somebody was trying to break in and that she needed to call 911 now. Nick rushed her downstairs, following behind with a loaded double-barrel shotgun, where they attempted to escape. It's unclear why Nick didn't go first, seeing as he had the weapon, but I digress. Instead of making a great escape, the two were confronted by the intruder who had made his way through their locked door and into their home. When police tried to dig further into why they left their bedroom instead of sitting tight and shooting if they needed to, Nick explained that they'd made an agreement that they would avoid confrontation and flee to their car, which was in the back of the house. I'm not really sure why you'd be trying to escape through the same means by which you heard somebody trying to enter your home, especially when your car is on the other side of the house. But hey, I've never been in this situation before, thankfully. He said the intruder tried to grab the barrel of the shotgun from Nick's hands, but the two struggled for a few moments. And this is where things start to get a little fishy. Nick says while Heidi was running towards the kitchen, his finger accidentally slipped to the trigger and pulled, shooting her in the back. Then, the intruder shot him and ran out of the house unscathed. Police were immediately suspicious of Nick's story, as were I and probably you as well. Despite this being a stressful situation that the couple has never experienced before, a lot of the details just weren't making any sense. That is when they turned to Nick and began asking him about any marital troubles that may have existed. Interestingly enough, Nick let investigators know that he and Heidi were deep in debt, something that he initially described as normal stuff. However, this normal stuff was nearly 2 years of missed mortgage payments, to the point that their house had been foreclosed on, and they were due to be out of it within the next 24 hours. You see, after Nicholas and Heidi bought their house in 2007, the global financial crisis hit soon after. Like many struggling families at the time, it wasn't long before the couple had taken out 2 mortgages on their new home, and the bank was warning them that their house would soon be foreclosed on. By the summer of 2009, the home was sold at auction. With the weight of possible financial ruin looming over the heads of many, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising and strange was that one of the sergeants on the case found, as she sorted through the texts and emails between the couple, that Nick had never mentioned any of this to Heidi. There was no talk of moving, renting a storage locker, or even figuring out where they would sleep the next night. Sure, he could have brought it up in person, but the fact that there was absolutely not even a hint of the foreclosure spoken between the two led investigators to believe that Heidi wasn't aware of their impending homelessness. She was even scheduled to work the day that they were being kicked out. Nick admitted during his statement that they hadn't yet figured out any sort of plan. Not to mention, her family was clueless about this fact, despite her being extremely close and open with them. Her brother Pete has stated that he knows his sister well enough to know that there was absolutely no way she would have kept such a huge secret from them. She was the type of person that leaned on others for support, not the type to bear the weight of things on her own. She fully trusted Nick to manage their money, and though she had reminded him to take care of things over and over again, foreclosure was never mentioned to her. In writing, at least. An interesting fact later found by investigators was that the day before Heidi's untimely death, Nick had told her that their identities had been stolen, putting them into $18,000 to $20,000 worth of debt. But of course, this was proven to be completely untrue. To further support the fact that Heidi was completely clueless about the house, Nick was the only one to attend the court hearings regarding eviction less than 2 months before Heidi's death. While there aren't a ton of details about what went down at that hearing, Nick did sign a property release form, agreeing that anything left behind in the home after the eviction could be discarded or destroyed. His lawyer found this a little strange, but just kind of hoped that there wouldn't be any issues in the future, considering Heidi hadn't signed any sort of agreement to this. Towards the end of this almost 2-hour conversation with the sergeant, Nick finally voiced his concerns for his wife's well-being, albeit very strangely.
Well, I just want to know the final answer on Heidi. She didn't make it. I figured that. I mean,
when police obtained a search warrant for the house, they found that absolutely not one singular piece of their belongings was packed up or moved. There were a few boxes, but nothing that could be used to move everything in just one day. It looked just like your average lived-in home. Even the fridge was fully stocked. And despite this grand struggle that Nick claims happened in their small foyer the previous day, there was an entry table completely untouched with an intact vase and beer bottle. Wouldn't these things have been knocked over in such a deadly altercation? Even more, investigators saw old marks on the front door, but nothing recent to indicate that anybody had forced themselves in. Since Nick had claimed that he awoke to the sound of somebody jiggling the door handle, police didn't want to leave any stone unturned. They did perform a recreation where one cop went and stood in the couple's bedroom, and another jiggled the front door handle furiously. Even awake, the cop in the bedroom could not hear any of the commotion going on downstairs. Furthermore, there was zero DNA evidence to suggest that anyone else had been in the foyer. 5 days later, at Heidi's funeral, her loved ones noted that while grief can present itself differently from person to person, Nick lacked any real emotion. Maybe that was because he was the one that pulled the trigger, and he felt some type of guilt. But the question was it really an accident? As the weeks went on, Nick hired an attorney who quickly realized that Nick was the prime suspect and needed to cease any answering of questions. The police tried to get him to work with a forensic sketch artist to create a drawing of the suspected intruder, yet Nick's attorney declined, saying that they would find their own private artist. Though once the sketch for hire was released to the public, it was no help in finding out who could be behind the loss of Nick's wife. As time passed and the investigators were stuck in terms of any leads, Nick continued on with his life. There's really no signs that he tried to figure out who the intruder was at all. He never even checked in with the police, unlike Heidi's family, and the entire situation seemed to be the last thing on his mind. Eventually, he began dating a woman named Rachel Sanchez, who happened to be the sister of one of Heidi's best friends. All the fish in the sea, and you just had to keep it in the same pond, huh? Rachel was going through a tough divorce at this time, and she too felt like she was grieving the loss of someone she loved, although in a significantly different way. In addition to their similar religious beliefs, she said that this shared difficulty brought them closer together, since Nick seemed to be handling this situation with ease. He spent a lot of time with his friends, who remarked that he never really spoke about what happened, and the few times he did, he kept it short and sweet. Somebody broke in, and he accidentally shot Heidi in a struggle over the weapon. Still, his friends wondered if he'd really given himself enough time to process everything. On the other hand, Rachel admired how he took things in stride. I'm not sure if shooting your innocent wife in the back and killing her is something you really want your partner to get over easily, but over the years, the couple would introduce 3 children into the world. In 2015, 5 years after that fateful night in the Firkus home, police were surprised to receive a call to their tip line from somebody claiming to recognize the person depicted in the perpetrator sketch. The only problem being was that this person was in prison at the time of Heidi's death. Around 2019, Nick and his newest wife, Rachel, suddenly split from their marriage and divorced. Of course, police were quick to swoop in and collect any intel on Nick that they could, and boy, did she have some juicy details to spill. Rachel revealed that she was the one who left Nick after discovering a letter hidden in his sock drawer, a missed property tax payment that warned of foreclosure. Once again, despite being in charge of their finances, Nick had not been paying the bills. And this wasn't exactly a surprise to her either, as Nick had confessed to doing the same thing in his previous marriage with Heidi. And we all know how that ended. Rachel managed to confront Nick about his ongoing money problems on voice recording, which she promptly handed over to police.
The fact that you're lying was so easy for you to do in front of me over and over and over makes me think
that I could murder my wife.
that you could lie about something.
That I could murder my wife.
Yes.
Instead of denying that he caused any harm to his late wife, he was initially more upset with Rachel for suggesting such a thing, and then went silent. And now having a motive, police arrested Nick at his home in May of 2021 on first and second murder charges of his former wife, though he made bail and was free for 2 years before his trial. He was quick to say that Rachel was overreacting and making mountains out of molehills, but maybe she was just afraid to meet a fate similar to Heidi's. Nonetheless, neither the recorded conversation nor her testimony against him would be permitted in court, since prejudice could be a factor. In 2023, Nick went to trial. State prosecutors presented the argument that due to his shame about finances and desperation that the eviction was fast approaching, Nick staged the intruder story and killed his wife to avoid her discovering the truth. The FBI even created both a scaled model and an animated recreation of the Firkus home in order to prove how unlikely Nick's story was, especially considering the size of the entryway where Nick claims the struggle and accidental shooting ensued. On the other hand, Nick's defense said that he had no reason to kill his wife, as she was aware of their home being foreclosed on. After all, the house was supposedly filled with foreclosure documents to the point that she'd have to be, quote, stupid or naive not to know. To further prove their point, after Heidi's death, Nick wasn't suddenly swimming in cash. His house was still being foreclosed on, but now without his wife by his side to face the issue together. Additionally, they pointed out marks on the frame of the front door, which looked a whole lot like somebody had tried to pry it open with a screwdriver. However, after 11 days on trial, on February 10th, Nicholas Firkus was found guilty on 2 counts of murder. The jury had come to the conclusion that the man friends, family, and colleagues once turned to for life advice would have rather killed his life partner than submit to the guilt and shame caused by his lack of responsibility and integrity. There simply wasn't any evidence to support the fact that anyone else had been in their home that morning. At the sentencing, just a few months later, Nick maintained his innocence, which probably didn't help, as he was then granted a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Nick said he'll maintain his innocence until his dying breath, and is attempting to appeal his conviction. Heidi's family has understandably had a very difficult time since losing such an important family member, on top of the fact that the convicted killer was once somebody they'd trusted and grown used to seeing at family events like holidays, birthdays, and weddings. But one thing was for certain. Once he was finally convicted, they felt a shared sense of relief, though family and close friends of his have yet to accept that such a loving husband would do such a thing. That just about wraps up the end of today's case, and I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch. If you care to hang out a little while longer, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments. Do you think Nick was guilty of being sneaky and overreacting, to say the least, at the thought of just being honest with his wife rather than kill her? Or do you think he's telling the truth and there truly was a break-in? Personally, I have to agree with the jury due to the fact that all signs were pointing to guilt. The timing was just too convenient, unless by some coincidence that an intruder did know they were getting evicted and would be in a vulnerable position. That just seems very unlikely to me. So that leaves me to reiterate how crazy of a decision it is to make simply because you can't be honest. This man would really rather take the life of the woman to whom he wed himself rather than to just admit that he royally messed up and that they were getting evicted. I'm sure she would have much rather been in a sticky living situation rather than, dead. The fact that his second wife then went on to have a similar experience with him and a bad feeling about everything also says a whole lot. With that, I want to thank you again for watching, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye! I accidentally summoned the police when I said that, so...